You don't want to miss this.
I want to go ahead and get to something I've been thinking about doing more and more of, and that is my favorite kind of like movie lists overall. And I kind of want to theme it, since we just had the release of Day Shift and just did my review. I want to talk about my absolute 10 favorite vampire movies, what I consider to be some of the best vampire movies out there, and ones that I encourage you guys to seek out and watch. I think they're pretty fun. And so we're going to go ahead and get right into this list. And I'm going to start from number 10 and then go all the way to my number one, chat. But for all these movies, I rank them. I feel like all these movies are great. They're all kind of full price territory, chat. Ones that I feel like you get a lot out of them, and they incorporate, even though they all have vampires, and vampires are featured as villains and heroes, chat, or threats. I feel like they all incorporate like different genres that also make them kind of stand out among a lot of other vampire fare. And the first one I want to start with, chat, is one that came out, and that's point like over a decade ago, but one that I think is really, really good, and that is 2009's Daybreakers, chat, with Ethan Hawke and Willem Dafoe. What I really like about this movie is that it's kind of set in a, not too distant future where vampires are now the dominant species on the planet, chat. Humans are pretty much treated like cattle. They're solely a food source. But in this world, now that vampires are in full control, you have it where the food source is dwindling. Humans are dwindling, and vampires are starting to go savage, chat. And you have the character of Ethan Hawke, who is this scientist. I think his name is Dr. Edward Dalton, who's eventually finds himself caught up in this fight with humans. This group of humans who's being led by Willem Dafoe, who was a former vampire and has a cure that can both save the human species but also cure various vampires of their vampirism. Sam Neill is also in the film as a villain, chat. I think it's really good. It's bloody. It's got some great action scenes. It's got some great performances. I mean, listen, you got Ethan Hawke. You got Sam Neill. You have Willem Dafoe, chat. You know you're going to have a good time. I really love this movie. I feel like it's kind of like an underrated sci-fi action horror movie. If you want to see something a little different with vampires in a more of a cyberpunk, near future setting, one where vampires are on top and they're kind of not in the shadows, where they're like a secret society. This one's pretty cool. It stands out among a lot of typical vampire fare that we've gotten. Moving on from vampires, where this one kind of goes to more their savage roots, chat, and that is the film adaptation of 30 Days of Night, which is adapted from an American horror comic. It stars Josh Hartnett and Ben Foster and Danny Houston, who plays the leader of these savage vampires in Alaska. That's the one thing about this movie that I really, really like. I have a thing for snowy settings in horror films because, I don't know, it just makes it feel like the threat is greater because the elements are against you, chat. There's something about that's why I enjoy films like The Thing so much, because there's something about the Arctic environment that is so depressing and obviously cold and is just as great a threat as the creature or the threat that you're dealing with. And the whole thing, it focuses on this small Alaskan town that's beset by this like pack of vampires. And the reason why like these vampires have come out of hibernation is because in Alaska, they have this period, this 30-day long polar night where there is no sunlight. And it's all these people trying to survive and to come together to fight against them. It's really cool. It's very bloody. It's super gross, chat. And again, it's another movie that I feel like is underrated and didn't get like a fair shake when it originally came out. The comic is also pretty cool, but I personally feel like the movie's even better than the comic. I think we get to know these characters a little bit more, and what happens to them. Kind of has a bit of a melancholy ending in my opinion, chat. Speaking of melancholy. Moving on to my 8th favorite vampire film, I have to bring up Let the Right One In, also Let Me In, which is the American adaptation. It's originally based on a Swedish novel, I think it's from 2004, Swedish novel, where it focuses on this bully. It takes place in the 1980s. Focuses on this bully, 12-year-old boy who develops a friendship with this very strange, awkward little girl. and they live in the suburb in Stockholm. And this little boy eventually, who's in the Swedish version, is clearly disturbed and has psychopathic tendencies. He learns that this little girl that he befriends is actually a vampire, and that she's being protected by her familiar, this guardian chat. It's one of the more uncomfortable vampire films of the modern age, one that deals with children. It is very graphic. It is very violent, and has what can be interpreted as both a wholesome but uniquely disturbing ending. Like, one of the cool things is you kind of learn, like, what the fate of this little boy will eventually be as he protects this little vampire girl who is a lot older, obviously. There was an American remake by Matt Reeves, which I think personally, I feel like it's just as good as the original one. Like, you can, whichever one you watch, I feel like you're going to have a good time. The American remake stars Chloe Grace Moretz, Cody Smith-McPhee, I think it's Cody Smith-McPhee, and Richard Jenkins, who plays like the familiar guardian role in the movie. Really good, Chad. And again, it has like a snowy setting, which kind of makes it stand apart. I just like that. It's like, I like snowy settings for horror films, and it works very well for this movie. Moving on from a more recent vampire film, which I talked about a lot of more recent ones, Chad, that have been made in the 2000s and in the 2010s. Well, we got to talk about a 1980s vampire movie, Chad. The 80s was filled with great vampire films. You're talking about, the 80s. You got to bring up Fright Night, the original 1985 Fright Night, Chad, which featured the directorial debut of Tom Holland, the director, Chad. Not the actor. But this whole film, it again, has a very 1980s premise, almost Spielbergian in a way, where you have this boy named Charlie, who learns that his new neighbor, this Jerry Danridge, is a vampire, and he's like, no one believes him, and he's like, all right, I gotta get someone to help me, and so he decides, well, at this point, he's like, well, the TV never lies, I gotta go ahead and get Peter Vincent, played by the late, great Roddy McDowall, Chad, who's probably best known for a lot of his appearances in the Planet of the Apes films. Also, he's the voice of the Mad Hatter in Batman the Animated Series, but who is this like TV show host who acts as a vampire hunter in films to help him actually stop Jerry Danridge and his various familiars and acolytes from sucking the town dry. It has a lot of it kind of presents itself in some parts as a comedy, but it's actually really gory. It's pretty terrifying and it has some great practical effects. Also, even though it gets a lot of hate, I like the Colin Farrell remake. I think what was it with Anton Yelchin, the late great Anton Yelchin, Chad. I like that movie too. That movie also didn't get a fair shake when it came out. I mean, it's hard to beat the original 85 one. If I were to rank them, I'd still say like the 85 version is better. But the remake, I think, is pretty good as well. I forget what year it came out. So it's something in the early 2010s. But Colin Farrell, I thought, did a great job. And I believe Anton Yelchin was also in the role of Charlie, if I'm correct. But yeah, they made a sequel to Fright Night, which I've never seen before. It was just Fright Night Part 2, which came out like several years afterwards. I never saw it. I would be very curious to hear people's opinions on it, but I guess it didn't make an impact because I really just don't hear a lot about it. But the original one, highly recommend, Chet. Really, if you want a good 1980s vampire film, this is a great one to watch and a great one to start with, in my opinion. But then, Chet, hey, the 90s also produced some great vampire films. If you're bringing up 90s vampire movies, you have to bring up Interview of a Vampire, which of course is a film adaptation of Anne Rice's original novel, 1976 novel, which Anne Rice has written some great vampire fiction over the years. And this, of course, stars one of Tom Cruise's unusual roles. Like, typically when we think of Tom Cruise, nowadays, we often see him as like the prototypical action hero. Most recently in Top Gun Maverick, which is great. One of the best performances of his career. But if I were to list like maybe his top 5 performances, I got to bring up his performance as Lestat, which famously Anne Rice said, I'm totally against that casting. And she like, even said it like publicly, but then she watched the movie. She's like, I was completely wrong. Tom Cruise does an excellent job as Lestat. It mostly focuses on Brad Pitt's character, who is being interviewed by Christian Slater, who is this journalist who basically tracks him down, and his name is Louis. who goes over basically the history of his life from like the late 1790s for when he was bitten and his relationship with Tom Cruise's Lestat, and also him turning by an incredible performance. I don't know if this was her first role, but it was definitely one of her early defining roles. Kristen Dunst as the character of Claudia, who is this 10-year-old who is transformed into a vampire. The thing is, like, when you're transformed into a vampire, you're immortal, but you stay the same age forever. And so she's this girl who's in this 10-year-old body, but she, grows up decades, and she starts to act like an adult, but she's trapped in this body. It's kind of horrifying, and she's like a little savage. You also have Antonio Banderas in the movie as well, Stephen Rea. Just great cast, really cool ending, chat, and just it's also like a morality tale, like, where you have the Christian Slater's character who wants to become a vampire, who wants immortality, and Brad Pitt's like, I just told you how fucking miserable I am because of my vampirism. Why would you want this? And they've done sequels, kind of spiritual successor sequels. I guess as you guys are pointing out in the chat, KRC 16, they're making a TV series based on this, which I'm like, okay, I mean, we'll see. We'll see. I'm not against it. I mean, it's material that is obviously ripe for continuous adaptation, but it is a hard one to beat. Like I always say, if you're going to do that, make sure you're as good, if not better, than the original. So we'll see. But yeah, I really like this one. This is when it comes to 90s vampire movies, watch this one, Chad. Speaking of 90s vampire movies, you have to bring up, if you're bringing up 90s vampire fare, 1998's Blade, which to me, as I said many times, is the grandfather of the modern day superhero film, Chad. We wouldn't have movies like The Dark Knight, Iron Man. We wouldn't have even earlier films like Sam Raimi's Spider-Man or, 2000's X-Men without Blade. This made a lot of things possible, Chad. Wesley Snipes is perfectly cast as the character of Blade, which is an Americanized version of the hero. Like, people forget, Blade is actually British. He's actually English, chat. But, I love the approach to this, making it like a lot of superhero fare that we were getting, throughout the 70s and 80s. They're like, no, let's make this a serious action horror film. And where we follow this vampire hunter, and he dispatches vampires in gory, efficient fashion. I mean, when you think of some of the greatest openings in superhero movies, people often bring up, the blood rave. People often bring up all of the various sequences in which, Blade is fighting these vampires and using his samurai or his katana. Chad, I mean, it's great. Whereas I think the other films in the franchise don't live up to the first one. I know a lot of people love Blade 2. I'm not a big fan. Actually, having seen it recently the last couple months, I'm like, yep. There's a lot of this I don't like. I feel like it went too CGI heavy, and the less said about Blade Train, the better. The original Blade still stand the test of time. Like, really the only things that are honestly dated about it is the CGI. Like, everything else, like, the performances are all great from both Wesley Snipes, but also you have Chris Christopherson is great as Whisper. Stephen Dorff. I wish he had a more of a career, but he is excellent as Deacon Frost in the movie. Yeah, there's just a lot in here. Nebusha Wright, I think, is very good in the film. Yeah, no, if you want a really cool action horror vampire film, Blade is the textbook answer. And also just to see a little bit of history. Yeah, and then the quotes. Motherfucker's always trying to upskate uphill. So goddamn good. Yeah, I highly recommend this movie, chat. It's great. And then another one, now we gotta get into the 2000s. Again, we're kind of jumping back into 2000s. Actually, early 2010s. And it's for a movie that I feel like not a lot of people know about, or they've kind of forgotten about, but I really love this. And, I like it when all sorts of horror films start to blend in different genres. And certainly post-apocalyptic, which can always be fun. It's always a great setting, chat. But I want to bring up my number 4. They were already in my top 5, chat, so Blade's number 5. Then we get to my number 4. Number 4, which is Stakeland. Which a lot of people might not know about. It came out in 2010. It's directed by Jim Mickle. And it revolves around this orphaned teenage boy who has kind of been taken and adopted by this vampire hunter, which he only which he calls Mister. And basically, it's their quest to trying to find a safe haven for themselves in a world, at least on the North American continent, which has been overrun by savage vampires and also vampire worshipping cults. They get all this whole other kind of like cast of characters, supporting characters that joins them on their adventure. They find this pregnant girl who, was before, she got pregnant right at the start of the apocalypse, and her significant other was killed. And, they also find this nun who's being preyed upon by this vampiric cult who, they want to murder and sacrifice her. And we meet all these other characters. And there's some great, again, this is what I'm talking about when it comes to like really gritty vampire movies. There's something about what this world feels lived in. Like you could tell, this has a low budget, but they use their minimum sources well. And they use them quite effectively because there's some great gore, some great effects, but you still have these really cool characters and this tight-knit group, and when bad things happen to them, you really feel it. This is not an easy watch. A lot of these characters, they meet very grisly ends, but if you want something a vampire movie that's set in a post-apocalyptic environment, this is the one you got to go with. I really, really love Stakeland. They did a sequel, which I've never seen. I heard kind of mixed things about it, but this one is great. This one is great. When it comes to modern vampire movies, watch this one. This is usually on Netflix, too. And moving on from that, chat, like, hey, listen, we talk a lot about scary vampire films, action vampire films. Some of the best ones are comedies. Like Fright Night has some comedy in it, chat. But I think probably one of the best vampire comedies is, even though he's a guy, now all the cool kids hate him, chat. It's really cool to hate this guy. But Taika Waititi's What We Do in the Shadows is really good. For those that don't know, it centers on these several vampire flatmates who live in Wellington, New Zealand, and they come from all these different, time periods, and it's about their dysfunction. It's kind of presented as a mockumentary. I love this movie. I feel like for a lot of people, this was their first. Certainly, it was me. I can only speak for myself, but this was my first exposure to Taika Waititi as a director, as a writer, as an actor, and he knocked us out of the park. For those who are just kind of unfamiliar with his material, have only seen like his Thor movies or something, it has a lot in common with, at least the comedic sensibilities, like Shaun of the Dead. It has I wouldn't say, even though this is New Zealand, kind of like a British humor. It's very dry. And they have some great jokes, some great callbacks to jokes, but also it's very much a vampire movie where it's gory, it's grisly. They incorporate other monsters, Chad, and all the dysfunction that ensues. I fucking love Peter. He's one of my favorite, recurring gags in this film. Who's like this Nosferatu Count Orlok-esque vampire who's like thousands upon thousands of years old. It's great. I know everyone hates Taika Waititi now, but I still feel like he's offered some amazing content in the last 10 or so years, and this is great. Also, the show, I have to recommend the show too, chat, which also takes place in the same universe as the movie. Like the characters from the film, which is also, I should say, this is not only directed by Taika Waititi, it's also co-written and directed by Jermaine Clement, who also stars in the film. He's the one right behind me right there. He does a great job. He deserves as much praise as Waititi does for this movie. And he has a number of other character actors as well, who played like different creatures and monsters. And the werewolves, chat, were werewolves, not swearwolves. But no, this is some of the best of Taika Waititi's humor on full display. He does a great job in this film. But do check out the show too, which is now in its 4th season. Honestly, how they've kind of expanded the material, like the show might actually be better than the movie now. But you can't do wrong with either, in my opinion. Watch the movie and then watch the TV show. And then, chat, again, this is number 3. We're in my top 3 right now. And at number 10, chat, is a movie I've reviewed, I talk about, that I reference throughout my own streams, and that is The Lost Boys by Joel Schumacher, chat. Yes, before Joel Schumacher did Batman and Robin, Joel Schumacher did a lot of other movies, chat, some great films. And I think one of his best movies, and again, it's another 1980s vampire film. That was a great decade for vampires, and that was The Lost Boys, which centers on this family moving to this coastal California town to live with their grandfather after a nasty divorce. and you follow the Corey Haim, Jason Patrick, as they find themselves embroiled with a pack of vampires led by Kiefer Sutherland. We're also introduced to these amateur vampire hunters, one of which is played by Corey Feldman. And yeah, this one is a little more comedic. It just, I don't know, it's something about it. It's a blend of some just fun drama, comedy, and some horror. And it kind of represents a lot of the best aspects of 1980s genre filmmaking to me. It also is kind of influential, chat, even though, the guy's a piece of shit, but it's influential on other shows that we would see in the 1990s and into the 2000s. Specifically, this was a huge influence, this movie, on Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Because the design for Kiefer Sutherland's vampire and the various other members of the Lost Boys, also like Alex Winter is in this too. Like how the vampires are portrayed in Buffy and also in Angel is based off of these designs. So yeah, it kind of shows its impact on filmmaking and just how vampires have been portrayed in cinema decades on. Yeah, this is great. I love this movie. Highly recommend checking it out. But that's the other thing. I have not seen the sequels. So I have not seen no, I have seen the sequels. I saw the first one. It's not great. It's not very good. Never saw the third one though, chat. And they're directed DVD sequels that came out like decades later. There was an attempt by Joel Schumacher to do the score and the soundtrack for this movie is fantastic too. Highly recommend it. There was an attempt to do a sequel soon after the release of the first movie. It was going to be called The Lost Girls, where Kiefer Sutherland's character would have survived the events of the previous film, and he would have formed his own new female vampire cult. But it never happened. Never happened. Apparently, they're doing a remake now, or there's they're working on a remake. I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. I don't know how this would work because I don't know. There's something about how timeless this movie is, and I love the 80s aesthetic. Like, just how the clothes, like Kiefer Sutherland's, they're dressed like punk rockers. Well, the leather, and they look like they smell like shit. There's something about it. Like, I don't know if you were to do a remake, are you just gonna? It's gonna be. I imagine it's gonna be set modern day. I feel like you're gonna lose some of the attitude, the punk attitude. You're gonna lose some of the 80s grunge punk aesthetic that really made this movie stand apart. So yeah, I don't know about this. I don't know. But the original film is fantastic, chat. It's fantastic. But that's not my favorite. That is not my favorite vampire film. No. The top place, number one favorite vampire film, that falls to Near Dark, which is Catherine Bigelow, which is this is her solo directorial debut, chat. We're probably more familiar with her more recent content, like Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30. Which was more, drama Oscar fare. But I really miss the days when Catherine Bigelow was doing genre stuff. This, for those that don't know, this is an American neo-Western horror, where it follows this young man who is attacked by a female vampire in this small Oklahoma town, and he doesn't know what's happened to him. But he's adopted by the family, this vampire family, which is controlled by Lance Henriksen, chat. And Catherine Bigelow, of course, was also the wife of James Cameron. That was like kind of Lance Henriksen's connection to this movie. And they're like this nomadic, like cult of vampires, and they're basically trying to teach this guy to be one of them. It is great. It is gritty. It is nasty. I love that it kind of has these it's like a modern Western. It's like a modern Western, just happens to also feature vampires. Even though it got really positive reviews, it didn't perform very well at the box office, but it became like a cult hit years later. And it's also one that is like I can never find this. I gotta buy this movie. I have never been able to find this on a streaming service. Always gotta pay for it. So I gotta buy this on Blu-ray one day. But no, if you want something that, like, okay, you're tired of your prototypical, kind of gothic-esque vampires, or you want something that is a little nastier than The Lost Boys. When it comes to 1980s vampire movies, this is the best of the best. This is a nasty film. There's some very uncomfortable sequences in here. It has one of the best kind of like kill sequences when it comes to vampire movies. It's setting the bar. That's all you know. And I have to say, this is a great cast. Bill Paxton, who is one of the members of the vampire family, just gross and nasty. It's Bill Paxton at an 11, chat, and he's great. He was made to be a vampire. He's so goddamn good in this film. But yeah, nothing for me has reached the levels of Near Dark yet. I would love to see other vampire films that are like this, and we haven't really seen anything like that in quite some time. Some things have attempted to be this, but I feel like they've all been infinitely lesser. Like From Dusk Till Dawn, which I honestly vehemently dislike. Kind of has the sensibilities of Near Dark, but just a very uncomfortable movie. But Near Dark to me is fantastic. And R.I.P. Bill Paxton indeed. But that's my list, chap. Just to reiterate, my favorite vampire films of all time, going from 10 to 1. Daybreakers, 30 Days of Night, Let the Right One In or Let Me In, Fright Night. Also, I'll put up, the original 85 and the remake. I like the remake quite a bit. Interview with a Vampire, Blade, original Blade, Stakeland, What We Do in the Shadows, number 3. Lost Boys, number 2. And number 1, chat, Near Dark. Those are my favorite vampire films of all time. I think you would do well. I think you all be entertained by these, Chad. They all do something different, incorporate different genres. But if you want to see the best of the best, in my honest opinion, Catherine Bigelow's Near Dark. And someone convince her to make more genre movies, Chad. All these serious dramas she's making, I'm getting a little sick of them, in my honest opinion. But there you go. Those are my favorites. What about you guys out there? What are your favorite vampire films? I'm very curious.